If you're interested in attending Catholic worship, come consider the 10 o'clock a.m. Mass at St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. We're located just 4 blocks up from Soldiers Field Road at 43 Holton Street. You can check out our website at stanthonyalston.org. That's saintanthonyalston.org. And come to the 10 o'clock Mass and experience our chanted Liturgy of the Eucharist every Sunday. Let us offer our consecration to the Lord. Lord, we offer up to you this day, and we ask that your name be glorified in all that we do. We ask that we may continue to be signs of your presence in the world, and that we may be witnesses to you, your resurrection, and your reality in our lives, in your desire to be in the lives of all. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Welcome back to Ordinary Time. It is Ordinary Time again. Now, you're going to notice that next Sunday is going to be one of those, it's known as an Ordinary Time Solemnity. It's the Solemnity of the Holy Trinity. The following Sunday is the Solemnity of Corpus Christi, the body and blood of Christ. And then you're going to have, I guess, kind of using that expression, then it's going to be green from that point on. Yes, it is. It's going to be, the color green is ordinary time. So I don't mean like green lights, but it is. It's going to be nothing but green except for feasts and solemnities and memorials during the daily Mass. But for the rest of our time, right up until Thanksgiving, we are in the season of ordinary time, and the color is green. Well, our first reading is for the 7th week of Ordinary Time, Monday, and it comes to us from James. The Apostle James, he was the first of the apostles to be martyred, by the way, and he has, which we're going to look at today, he has that interesting expression where our faith must reveal itself in our works, and faith without works is dead. And this is something that confuses a lot of people, and as I always like to bring up when that subject comes up, confuses a lot of people because Martin Luther, who obviously founded the Lutherans, and we're Catholic, so we don't believe the same thing. We believe a lot of similar things, but a few things we don't. And Luther taught that we're saved by grace. And so he also didn't particularly like the letter of James because of its focus on works. But today we have a great piece of information that shows us what James means. Now, I've always brought up that none other than Dr. D. James Kennedy gave a great sermon on the difference between understanding we're saved by grace and what James says is that faith without works is dead. And D. James Kennedy did not like the Catholic Church. That's not saying anything out of school. He was very open about that. But here he gave a homily or a sermon on that subject that I agree with completely, because it was a truly, the subject of what we actually believe on faith and works. Well, James says something that adds to that, and that we show, he says, by our works, done with gentleness born of wisdom, and that is the key thing. This is one of the issues that I really get frustrated with, the idea that, and how many times I preach against it. We cannot live in a way that we're trying to earn our way into heaven. We do good works so that when we get before the Lord, he'll see all our good works and we'll get into heaven. It doesn't work that way. It has never worked that way. And this is a Catholic talking. And a lot of people believe, including among Catholics, that we do good works so that we can get into heaven. No. That's Pelagianism. It has been condemned by the church for almost 2,000 years. Pelagianism is exactly that. We earn our way into heaven. What we actually need to do is understand that when we embrace the wisdom of God and we develop that relationship with Christ, when we develop that relationship, which we do through our prayer, and we grow in wisdom, that's where our works come from. And that's the essential thing. Okay. And so what James is telling us is to purify our hearts so that when we do act as people of faith, it'll show in our works. You know, I've never told this story before, and I think this would be a great time to tell the story. I failed solder school in the Navy. I didn't fail. I think it was the only school I failed, and I knew I was done when I failed solder sucker. There's this little machine that when you heat the solder. Now, let's stop for a second. This was the United States Navy, right, with its full military budget that the United States Navy had. And there's this thing called a solder sucker that's made out of plastic. You can probably still buy it for about $20 at Walmart. And what you do is you heat up the old solder, the solder that's holding in a joint, and then you press this button on the solder sucker and you let it go, and it sucks, in theory, all the solder out. And so now you have no more solder around the joint. For some reason, I couldn't make that work. Now I find out there are electronic versions, or not electronic, vacuum versions of that. It's got a little vacuum cleaner attached to it. And then you heat it up, and the vacuum cleaner takes it out. And I'm like, I could have passed solder sucker if you had one of those things, the United States Navy. Well, anyway, to continue the story. What they would tell you is now I still continue the class, even though I failed solder sucker. When you did a solder a joint, and we were supposed to solder so well that our joints, our connections could end up on a space program. And I said, well, I'm a sonar technician, never going to end up in space. But I digress. So anyway, but they would look at it, and if there was a problem on the surface, then it would indicate that there was a deeper problem inside. And this is what James is talking about on our works and our faith, that we have got to live our faith, to embrace Christ, to call for the healing from Christ, that we may do the works that Christ calls us to do, not to earn our way to heaven, but as fruits of our faith. And as James continues, if you're really caught up in bitterness and anger and earthliness and the other stuff in such a way that it blocks the ability to do the good works we're called, then that's a problem. And that's what he's telling us. So he's calling us to understand that the good works come from our faith and our inner disposition in service to Christ. And so that's what we're called to do. And so it's kind of back to that whole solder thing, that if there's a problem on the outside, it's because there's a problem on the inside. And so if my works are the case of, well, I'm sorry, but this isn't that kind of a parish, we don't serve those kind of people, well, that's a problem. That's a problem. We prayed at our parish, not that we would have more people at our Mass, but we would have the people that the Lord wanted to be at our Mass. Do you understand? And regardless of who they are, that's the important side. That's what we're called to do. So that's a difference, you understand? So that whole concept. So this is what James is talking about. Our faith is to be reflected in how we live our life, and how we live our life is got to be transformed internally by our faith, and that's important. And going back to my solder sign, that if there was a problem on the outside, then that would mean there's a problem on the inside. And one of the funny stories is the professor would look at it. I think there would be like a 1 to 5, the professor, it was another sailor, 1 to 5 grading, and he'd look at it and say, he'd do his own job. He'd do this, see, that's what I do. Yeah, and then he'd say, yeah, that's about a 3. Well, if you're only doing a 3, how can you ask me to do a 5? Well, I could go on forever on solder sucker school and soldering school. But anyway, but that still was a point that I always remembered. If it didn't look good on the outside, then there was a problem on the inside. And we have to realize that didn't mean that the joint didn't hold. It meant that the joint would not hold if it was ever put on the space shuttle at that point and sent out to space, because there were a lot of pressures involved that would damage the solder. And we've seen examples. This was in the early 1980s, not long before the accident of the Challenger happened in 1986. This is long before that. But we could see in 1986 how a little thing could destroy the whole operation. And that's what they were focused on, and rightly so. I failed the course. I didn't do bad for soldering, but I was so much behind because I couldn't get the solder sucker. And now we find out there's this little thing. Here it is, like 40 years later, still complaining about it. Now we're talking, there's this little thing that has this soldering gun with this little vacuum thing attached to it, and you can just heat the solder and it takes it away. Where was that when I was flunking solder sucker? But you can see that message is there. That message is there. That seek to allow the faith to transform us through the wisdom of God, transform us internally, that we may do better works externally. And our works do not gain us into heaven. They are just the fruit of our faith and are being transformed by Christ. You see how all that works. Anyway, we're going to talk more tomorrow. In the meantime, have yourself a blessed day, and we will see you then. I want to call your attention to Catholic TV, which offers great faith-filled, family-friendly programming 24 hours a day. You can find your cable channel at www.getcatholictv.com, and you can watch online on the free apps or check out the YouTube channel. Daily Mass, Rosaries, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Novena are all available online and on demand. Check out CatholicTV.com. Remember, when you're looking for a place to attend Mass, and if you don't already attend Mass at your local parish, come to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. We're located at 43 Holton Street in Allston, just a few blocks up from Soldiers Field Road. And you can check us out, come to our 10 o'clock a.m. Mass, and come to experience our Catholic worship at St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts.